So I have to begin by telling you that in full disclosure, I asked to preach about our topic today. Today's topic is strong emotions and how to deal with them. And I really genuinely and authentically believe that I am the best person suited to talk about strong emotions and how to deal with them. After all, I've stood in this pulpit and I've preached about the impact of trauma. I've talked about how Jesus flipped tables with righteous anger. I've talked about the uncertainty of knowing how to sit with empathy and sympathy with those around us. I've talked about the power of vulnerability and how to sift through the anxieties and fears that causes us. And I've talked about how to sit with people in the darkest of valleys. I have stood before you professing that we, as part of God's beloved humanity, are feelers. We're super feelers. And I have talked about how in order to live into authentic community with one another, we have to own our feeliness. But if I'm being honest, none of that is why I believe I am best suited to talk about strong emotions and how to deal with them. Because you see, strong emotions have been pulling at me my whole life. And it is impossible for me to hide how I'm feeling on my face. Whether it is about cake or Mega Bloks, I have all the feels all the time. So yeah, strong emotions and how to deal with them, it just seemed like it was sort of meant for me. And I used to blame this on my gingeriness. Sometimes I still try to. But the reality is I know plenty of gingers who are the kindest, most least bothered people around. And then there's me. I feel all the time. And not at a level 2, but level 38. All the time. I cry at commercials with fervor, I mean it. I'm genuinely upset or drawn in. And I can't even deal with the Hallmark Channel. I feel. I'm a super feeler to the max. So last week, when our senior pastor, Brian, when he talked about what it's been like for us as a staff to figure out how to sift through the topics that you've chosen for this sermon series, he made an important statement. That when we got your topics, that's all we got. We didn't get the backstory on why someone wanted to hear about strong emotions and how to deal with them. What prompted that? What did they really want to know? And then for all of you that voted for that, what do you want to know? Are people wondering how to deal with a particular strong emotion like grief or anger or sadness? Are people wanting to know how to just stop feeling altogether? Do people want to know how to compartmentalize so that we only feel the good feelings and not the bad feelings? And the reality is, I have no idea. I don't know what that person who submitted this topic wanted, and I don't know what any of you who voted for it want. And so when I considered that, I had to acknowledge that I literally had no idea how to start writing this sermon. So I did what I know to do in those moments when I'm seeking inspiration or direction, and I started sifting through books. And I sifted through a book on Job, which in my mind is like the Bible passages that have the strongest emotions possible, because Job just really goes through it. And then I started reading about trauma and the brain and trauma and theology. And then I started picking apart these sort of self-help gurus, these books to kind of teach us how to live a good life. And here's what I've found. Each of these authors have different approaches and perspectives on how to deal with strong emotions, but they all had one thing in common. Ignoring strong emotions only makes it worse. They all agree that when we attempt to resist experiencing our strong emotions, then the less likely we are to find resolution. Because at the end of the day, when we lay our head down to rest, all of those things that we didn't deal with that day, well, they are waiting for us tomorrow. Didn't go to the grocery store? Well, you're going to have to go eventually. Didn't pay that bill? Well, you're going to have to pay it eventually. You didn't deal with the pent-up anger you have towards your partner? Well, you're going to have to deal with that eventually. Didn't mow the lawn? Well, you'll have to. Didn't deal with the resentment and frustrations that you have for your job? You're going to have to eventually. And so on. Those things that we just don't want to feel, the things that we try to convince ourselves aren't really there. They're not going anywhere. And perhaps you're like me, and you've had experiences where those pent-up emotions just seem to like burst forth from within you at the most inopportune times. Like when you lash out at someone you love, even though it wasn't their fault, because the anger is bursting forth from within you like a fire. Or my norm, when you burst into tears at a coffee shop because the grief is literally pouring out of you. Or when you post that status update, the one that is dripping with hatred and bordering on, or it's dripping with judgment and bordering on hatred, because the fear and the terror is just too much to face. We're feelers. And we live in this world where society tries to tell us that we can't feel, or rather that we shouldn't feel. That everything we do has to be Instagram ready, has to be sort of squared off, right? Only the good parts are showing. And we live in this world that tells us that we have to be in control of our emotions. But what they really mean is that we have to be able to not feel at any given moment. And we need to be in control of the off switch. Don't be angry, don't be sad, don't feel discriminated against, don't lust, right? None of that. Which is ridiculous because we're humans and we feel and we're not robots. We are feelers. Last week I was in St. Louis and I was attending a young clergywomen's conference. And when the conference started, I have to admit, I was fairly disengaged. Even though I wanted to be present in that conference, in many ways, my mind was back home. I had a sermon to write. I had children's ministry items to take care of. I had PhD classes to contend with. And at the beginning, it didn't matter how hard I tried. I just couldn't figure out how to connect. I was just totally checked out. Does that ever happen to you? You're like trying to attend something, a meeting, a gathering, and you know that you really need to like be fully present. And you just can't. One morning, I was sitting in a cathedral in downtown St. Louis, and a fellow clergywoman asked all of the people in attendance to take a moment. She wanted us to center ourselves. And as quiet washed over the room, she looked at us with such intention. And she said, confess. Confess. What is laying on your heart? What are the thoughts and emotions that you are trying to hide? Confess, she said. What are those things that are blocking your sense of contentment? Anger. As plain as day, with certainty, that word anger nearly bore a hole through my chest. And even though I wasn't surprised, I still sat in that pew and cried. See, I've known for some time that I have anger on my heart, that I'm angry. And I like to tell myself that it's righteous anger. It's righteous anger. I'm frustrated with the injustices of this world, and I'm frustrated when somebody needs help, and I don't know how to offer that help. And when I call it righteous anger, it makes it seem like it's Jesus-y, and so I can just let it go. But in that moment, My confession was that my anger really wasn't so righteous. My anger was often petty, or stemming from hurt or frustrations. I was angry if I felt like someone else didn't have to work as hard as I had to work. I was angry if I felt like someone had it easier than I had with a variety of issues. I was angry. And there it was, right in front of my face, no way to turn away from it, anger. Anger and I were in a face-off, and I didn't know who would win. And sitting in that cathedral, I had to really resist the temptation to just stuff that anger right back down. I had to resist the urge to tell myself that I didn't feel it, that it wasn't real, and that I just needed it to go away. To resist the temptation to do anything I could to get another hour or day or week of not having to deal with my anger. But I had confessed. Call me crazy, but it seems sort of indicting to confess something in a cathedral before God and then say, JK, and they snatch that right back. So I had to figure out how to deal with it. What did it mean? What was I supposed to do? I don't know about you, but anger seems like one of those negative emotions, that thing that you really just don't want, and you certainly don't want to claim it. And so then I thought about this self-help author. His name is Mark Manson, and he has something to say about negative emotions. He says, negative emotions are a call to action, and when you feel them, it's because you're supposed to do something. Just because something feels good doesn't mean it is good. And just because something feels bad doesn't mean it is bad. Emotions are merely signposts, suggestions that our neurobiology gives us. They are not commandments. And I love this language that he uses here to say that emotions are a call to action. Because strong emotions and how to deal with them seems like that might require action. That's what you all wanted to hear today, at least those who voted. So here we go. Strong emotions and how to deal with them. Here is my answer for you. If strong emotions are a call to action, then the answer on how to deal with them is to actually deal with them. I know, I'm with you, it's mostly annoying. It's frustrating when we have to deal with the emotions that we don't want to. But there is something to be said for living into a call to action, because doing so means that change is possible. So if we consider this in terms of our strong emotions, then when we deal with them with intention, it means that change is possible. It means that we might not always feel that way. And really, at some point, isn't it just time to deal? The book of Ecclesiastes discusses this idea, this concept that there's a time for everything. It says, since there's a time for everything, there's a season for every purpose under heaven, a season to be born and a season to die, a season to plant and a season to harvest, a season to hurt and a season to heal, a season to tear down and a season to build up, a season to cry and a season to laugh, a season to mourn and a season to dance, a season to scatter stones and a season to gather them, a season for holding close and a season for holding back, a season to seek and a season to lose, a season to keep and a season to throw away, a season to tear and a season to mend, a season to be silent and a season to speak, a season to love and a season to hate, a season for hostilities, and a season for peace. I can't help but remember a season to weep, a season to laugh, a season to mourn, and a season to dance, a season to embrace and refrain, to search and to give up. I love it when Scripture gives us permission to be the super feelers that we are. Feelings everywhere. I particularly love this translation of this passage, the language of seasons, because saying there is a time to mourn is different than saying there is a season for mourning. Because time suggests a sort of indefinite frame. How long do we have to mourn? But a season. Well, we know that seasons are in a constant state of transition, and that they cannot last forever. Sometimes seasons last longer than we want, but we know that change is coming. And this is what Ecclesiastes is teaching us. And if we remember that Ecclesiastes is part of the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, then we have to acknowledge that Jesus followed the teachings of Ecclesiastes. And perhaps that's why Jesus was so intentional about allowing himself to feel. Because Jesus grieved alongside others. And he flipped tables out of righteous anger. And he felt disappointment when his disciples couldn't stay awake with him in his time of need. And he felt the heartache when he realized his disciples would betray him. Jesus was a feeler. And in addition to that, he dealt with those feelings. Jesus did something. So it seems like Jesus, too, experienced strong emotions as a call to action. And he wasn't afraid to be a person of intention when it came to seeking resolution for those emotions. And perhaps, most importantly, Jesus took accountability for his feelings. Jesus didn't pretend not to feel. Jesus didn't walk around Instagram ready all the time. Jesus was angry and frustrated and sad, and he understood that sometimes the things he felt caused behaviors that negatively impacted those around him. And he took account for that. Let us remember that there are times in Scripture where Jesus calls other people names. Where out of anger or frustration, Jesus dehumanizes others. And instead of just letting that linger there, he responded and said, "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't respond in the way that I should have in that moment. So I want to apologize here." And so perhaps as Christians, if we consider that we are the hands and feet of Christ, then maybe the best way to deal with our strong emotions is to do what Jesus did, to deal with them. I mean, this is your classic, what would Jesus do, live and in color. And we like to think of this statement only in terms of service to others or compassion to others or everything that we have to give to everyone else. But what if this statement is really supposed to remind us that it's okay to be gentle with ourselves? Because Jesus was. It's okay to feel all the feels because Jesus did. And then he dealt with them. I wish that there was an easier solution. Some sort of like top secret prayer I could tell you that would just absolve us of ever having to feel anything that we simply don't want to feel ever again. But I don't know any top secret prayers. But I do know that we are not alone, that Jesus was a feeler. He himself had strong emotions and had to deal with them, and he wasn't always perfect, but he made it through. So it makes me wonder if we could make it through too. And that idea, well, it gives me hope. And hope? Well, my guess is that we could all agree that sometimes finding hope is really difficult, especially when our emotions are going all haywire. And yet, despite the difficulty of sometimes being able to find hope, we are still a people that constantly, with this fierceness, we seek hope. As Christians, we seek it every year when we retell the story of Jesus' birth. We hold up that Christ candle as a light in the darkness, giving us hope. Not to mention all of the other times in our life when we seek it. But sometimes I think we feel like we lose hope, or that our strong emotions block hope. But experiencing anger or grief or sadness, that is not what blocks hope. Our unwillingness to deal with our strong emotions is what blocks hope. Because when we don't deal with those things that are bothering us, they bubble up, and pretty soon they're blocking our view of hope. And we think we're in darkness because we can't see through it. But what if we tried to deal with them? We tried to figure out what was causing that anger. We tried to figure out what are the things that we can do, changes we can make in our lives to try and mitigate the impact of those strong emotions. What then? My guess is that as we start to sift through those, we'll find that that is precisely where hope begins to creep in. There's no overnight fix. Trying to sift through your emotions doesn't mean that immediately your anger is going to vanish or your grief. But it could mean that even the smallest amount, you might feel a little better. It might not feel as heavy. Even the smallest amount. And then the next day, maybe it's just a little bit more. You don't feel as angry or as grief-stricken. And isn't that enough? Can't that just be enough? Because I get really worried. Sometimes I wonder if we are so caught up in this sense of like absolute resolution that our emotions just have to go away completely, that we forget that the tiny, intricate progresses that we make are genuine and authentic victories. And then sometimes I wonder if we've just sort of accepted the idea that we might always feel dismay or frustrated. Have we become that people? We just kind of go through life, we're like, yeah, I'm just kind of always going to be unhappy a little bit. It's just how it is. Everybody goes through it. Because like with all of the ideological tensions that are presenting through our social media feeds and all of the misleading or miscommunicated or just downright misappropriated information bursting forth from our media sources, have we just decided that we're always going to feel a little bit hopeless or terrified or angry? I don't know what those issues are for you that frustrate you, that are coming forth from outside sources that just make you feel like, dang, I don't know if I'll ever feel happy again. But I do know that we cannot fix all of those issues. There's too many people involved. We're not going to find absolute resolution. But the reality is, we are in control of ourselves. And in turn, that means that we have the autonomy to be able to manage our emotions, no matter how strong they are. It's about whether we will choose to do so. Remember when I talked about confession? sitting in that cathedral and having this clergy woman get up and say, confess. Well, we're at the part of the sermon where I ask you to confess. Don't panic. I'm not going to make you do it right here. Because that's between you and your emotions. That's between you and God. But I am going to ask you to find time today or in the next couple of days. Don't wait. Find time to confess. What is on your heart? What are those emotions that are laying on your spirit? Confess. Even if you think you feel nothing, confess. Even if you feel like you are in total control of your emotions, confess. You might be surprised. And besides, our strong emotions are not going anywhere. We can't change that. I can't fix that for you. What we can do is change how we deal with them, with those emotions. And I don't know what that answer is for you. We each deal and find healing in our own individualized ways. But I do know that we will not know peace if we continue to do nothing and push those emotions down. If we consider our emotions a call to action, will we be a people who accepts that call? Who seeks out how to deal with intention? Will we seek out hope? I pray that we do. Amen.